Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday night live stream. You're joining me today as I am going to be looking at another Homebrew Space Marine conversion. Now, a few of you may remember that in my last Homebrew Space Marine live stream, one of the things that I did was basically kind of challenge myself into randomly generating a name for a Space Marine chapter, and then converting something based around that name. Now, I used the 140k unofficial name generation tool that's on Realm of Plastic, and I basically generated a chapter that was called the Vorpal Hearts. Now, this is basically the chapter I've designed, kind of a little bit of a backstory around these guys, and I'll be showing you what's involved in creating them, basically. I'll also be generating the next Homebrew chapter using this tool as well. Now, last time I just basically clicked it and a fairly good one came up, and I thought, you know what, I'll go for that one. But I've randomly generated a few of these earlier today, and some of them don't work quite as well, so I'm going to give myself a reroll. So if I basically choose the Cardinal Tigers, for example, I might decide to regenerate. So let's generate the name for the next one, and we'll go for the Vorpal Hearts for this time. So let's just click and generate chapter name. The Consuls of Domination. That sounds pretty good, I'd say. Nice, very Space Marine soundy. Okay, we'll go for that one. So I'll keep that in mind, and just the next one we can take a look at doing those guys next time. But this time we're going to be doing the Vorpal Hearts. Now, the Vorpal Hearts are a chapter which are based, well, they are a second founding successor chapter to the Blood Angels. I thought the whole heart iconography makes more sense. And obviously because of the name, Vorpal, that basically means it's essentially like a blade. I think Vorpal blade is something a reference from Alice in Wonderland, if I'm not mistaken, for the Jabberwocky sword or something like that. I'm not super up to speed on my Lewis Carroll literature, but I think it's basically a sword. So that's kind of where I went for it with that. If you saw the thumbnail for this video, you can see it's a sword with a heart, and that's the chapter iconography. So we're going to go with something that's very much kind of has melee prowess. We want something which is basically something which is kind of close combat martial specialist, and I've basically had this really cool little sword that was from Conversion World. You can see here this nice little kind of falchion. It's based around like Emperor's Children, kind of heresy era Emperor's Children, but I thought it was really nice to build a conversion around this. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was to give the model a not over converter. I didn't want to add too much in the way of conversion. Some of my other videos I've added a lot of extra bits, but this time I wanted to do something which is more of a pose and more subtle. So what I've been doing is I've basically been rolling a little bit of putty here. We're going to be using a little bit of this. So this is just some of my Procreate. Let's see here. Just basically green stuff, same kind of thing, but I do prefer to use this because it's just a little bit less tacky than green stuff is. I find it a little bit easier to work with. So I've got that. I also have the torso and the legs and the arms from the Reaver kit, Primus Reaver kit. I'm going to base the conversion around these guys. I feel like they're going to be kind of close combat orientated, and so they need to have kind of quite flexible armor. That's what I'm going to go for here. Some of the components that I've got are taken from the Blood Angels. These guys are successors of the Blood Angels, so it makes a lot of sense to have some Blood Angel components. We have a head and a shoulder pad from the Death Company kit. And finally, we actually need something to represent the heart aspect of this. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to build this chapter as being renegade hunters. These guys are tasked with hunting down renegade Space Marines. They are trained to fight Space Marines specifically and are excellent at doing so. Now, as a trophy for each of these renegade Space Marines that they've killed, they will take the heart of them, hence the name Vorpal Hearts. And luckily, the Malasai kit from Age of Sigmar comes with these pierced hearts. I thought these would work really nicely. They fit with the theme, they fit with the name, and it just adds a little bit of kind of gruesome flavour, and also fits into that kind of sanguine aspect of a Blood Angel's successors. So anyway, I've been waffling on for a little bit. A big hello to everyone who's in the chat. I will be, as always, be glancing up at the chat, and will be answering questions. And yeah. So what I'm going to do, so yeah, Vorpal means exceptionally deadly, like a weapon that's so deadly people's heads come off from the slightest cut. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It works pretty well for Space Marines. I imagine that the fact that it's on the name generator, probably, I can't imagine they have like the cornflakes of Destiny or anything like that. Everything's going to be pretty cool. So the first thing we need to do is to readjust the pose. Now, I said that I wanted to make a little bit more of a dynamic pose. I wanted to do something with this conversion that wasn't just adding extra bits. I actually wanted to modify how this miniature looked. And I think that a good way of doing that is by just reposing the legs. Now, I think at the moment the pose that we've got, if I just kind of try to draw a dry fit, you can see that the pose that we've got here is kind of like a little bit slightly leaning on the left leg. I don't know if you can just about see that, but yeah, we're going to lean and we're going to extend that more. We're going to try and bend this knee. Now, I haven't really done this before, so this could prove disastrous. So we're going to try and bend this knee a little bit more. I'm going to bend it round a little bit like so, and fill in the gap. And then we're going to try and bend this knee a little bit more as well. So again, I haven't really done this before, so you're going to see whether or not this is a complete disaster or whether or not this works. So I'm essentially going to try and repose these legs. Now, I need to do a cut here. Now, this is going to be a little bit tricky because I need to basically cut, I think I need to cut underneath this knee pad here, and I need to cut around the back here. So I'm going to kind of go about this in a lumberjack way. I'm going to make two cuts and then meet in the middle. So I'm going to use this blade here, this sharp kind of jeweler's saw. I'm just going to make a cut down to that knee pad. So whilst I'm doing this, let's have a look. You'll need to adjust the feet too. Yeah, yes, I can, but I can also cheat. And, oh man, I'm going a little bit off center there. I can also cheat and use basing materials. Use a little bit of cork to adjust that. But yeah, if the feet look a bit weird, then we can kind of get away with it, I think, by just changing how we go about the basing aspect of things. So it's cutting through. I just need to make sure this stays level. It doesn't go too far through. It's not quite as precise as using a knife, but a really heavy duty kind of cuts. It's using saws is good for it. So try not to damage things too much, but if we do, we'll just add some battle damage. That's what we'll do there. So I think I'm just going to brush just to get rid of some of this dust here. I still need to go a little bit further. How will you attach the sword? So the sword comes with obviously a handle, and we already have a blade here. So I'm basically probably gonna cut it down, maybe pin it. It's quite a nice fine handle there. So I might maybe just use the existing one and just pin the blade to it, or have this bit poking out the end. I haven't decided just yet. So hopefully it won't take too long to do. I'm going to try and cut down here now. I'm going to do some very fine cuts. I'm going to start cutting along the groove here, just to kind of give me a little bit of a guide as to where I need to make the cut. I don't want to go off center. Just rocking it back and forward, and I can feel that's going through. There we go. And we have a detached leg from the knee, which means we can adjust, we can straight away see if we can add a bend in there. Makes it a lot easier. So we need to just file this down now, just clean it up, just to make sure we remove any extra overhangs of plastic first, and then we can actually see exactly what we're working with. So I'm just using a file here just to remove any extra bits. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm actually quite pleased that worked, because I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it at first. There's nothing like chancing things during a live stream, is there? What's the website for the name generator? It's on Realm of Plastic. If you search for Realm of Plastic and then Space Marine Chapter name generator, you should find it on Google. It's quite a useful little thing if you want to homebrew stuff. It's good as well if you want to get a little bit of inspiration, because usually, I'd say 90% of the time, there is some relation to a Space Marine Chapter name and how they look, how their aesthetics are. Space Wolves, they've got wolves. Blood Angels, they've got blood. Dark Angels, they're dark. Iron Hands have hands made out of iron. There you go, see? Clues in the name. This is, I need to get this a little bit cleaner because we're going to be using this. We're going to bend the knee in a little bit here. Probably need to adjust the waist joint as well. Okay. So let's see what we've got. So now we've got these joints separated. You can see I can start making slight adjustments now. I can essentially bend the leg a little bit more. We zoomed in a little bit too far. Let's zoom in a little bit more just so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. There we go. We've still got focus, so adjust the focus ever so slightly. There we go. Okay. So now we've got that. I think we need to decide how this is going to attach. So if I attach this now to the hip joint, we can kind of see how we're going to go here. So we're going to bend this around a little bit. And I kind of want to have a slightly lower pose. I want to have like almost like a sword fighting stance. I think by having the leg bent a little bit more, we can probably keep the hip joint as it is and just work around the foot. Maybe the foot will be a little bit trickier to pose though. That's the only thing I'm worried about here. But I think we can get away with that. I think if we attach that in, fill the gap in, have a slightly different pose. This leg will probably need to be brought out a little bit so we kind of have a slightly more kicked out leg. So it's kind of leaning a little bit more. There we go. That's what I'm going for. So this joint here can stay. So I'm going to glue this on now because I think the angle that actual joint is on is fine. So let's just glue that straight on here. So this will be the bulk of the conversion, I suspect, because reposing does require a little bit of tedious fiddling around just to make sure everything gets in properly. There we go. I'm just going to leave that to glue for the time being. Now this here, I think I'm going to file this down. We wanted to bend it a little bit more, so I'm going to start removing this slight protrusion here, this slight area which had the original section between the arm panels. Put that away and file that down. Okay, so if I bring in the leg again, we should be able to see that we can see exactly where we need to make the cut. So if we just keep it like that, we need to cut in slightly to this bit here, I think. Let's remove that. So I'm just going to leave that probably just to glue, just for that to firm up. What else can we work on in the meantime? Let's do the sword whilst we're waiting. Now the sword itself, the actual pose should be fine. I tried it out across the body for this particular blade, and it has quite a nice across the body pose there, so we can use this as it is, and we just need to attach this blade. Now looking at it, I think it's going to be a little bit too fine to pin, which means I don't want to have too small of a contact area. So the first thing we're going to do is just remove this blade here. I'm going to cut it down just below the pommel guard there. using a knife for this because the area is quite thin to cut through, and it'll give me a really nice thin cut through there. Just trim this down just to get back to the flat top of the grip. Okay. Let's trim that down a little bit more too. You know, I think I've got a little bit of putty on my knife and it's kind of not cutting as well. Let's try and remove that. That's better. There we go. The only thing I didn't really consider was this kind of knuckle duster effect that we've got on the front of the fingers there. So that's going to probably have to stay, which means we're going to have to keep the bottom in as well. So I think if we add the blade, if we cut it off at the handle, trim down this little section here, and we can add it there. I think that should work. We can always trim that bit off there and just attach the bottom of the pommel guard. Okay, let's go for that. So let's use the clippers for this, just to get a nice... So the main theme of this chapter is basically they are specialists in fighting other Space Marines. So they kind of hunt down renegade chapters. Their job is to bring them down, and the whole Vorpal part of their name is because they use swords and they're expert swordsmen, and the heart is because they take the hearts of any Space Marine, renegade Space Marines that they defeat. Okay, so just trim that down, and we can see where we need to start making the trims to get this to fit. So I think if we trim down the front of this knuckle guard here, this little slight dip in the pommel guard on this blade should fit into that slot. So we just start there. And then we can just smooth that down and see how that fits. And if that doesn't fit very well, then that's fine, because we can just do a little bit more trimming. A little bit more trimming, I think. Tiger Sympathizer, these guys are not Emperor's Children gene seed. They are Primaris, so officially, at least, they are Blood Angels, based on the Blood Angels gene seed. So I want to make sure this is going to be a nice straight join, so I'm just going to keep trying this out and to make sure that I've got a smooth flat surface there. Okay. Let's just grab some super glue, because we are using, actually I'll leave that for the time being. Let's see about adding this into the bottom here. Yeah, I think if we trim it there, we can add this just overhanging quite easily. So let's trim it just below there. Smooth that out, nice flat surface. And then we're going to do the same for this here. I'm just going to trim it just below about there, yep. Okay, so let's start gluing this together now. This gives us a chance for the super glue to dry before we start moving on to the next part as well. So just a little bit of super glue on the top of the hand, and then we can glue the sword onto that. Make sure it sits straight. Okay, I think that looks okay. And then we can glue the bottom of the pommel Again, make sure that's straight. Just to follow the same line throughout the hand as well. So it's kind of got quite a high grip on the blade there, but maybe that's just a fighting stance. Maybe. Okay, so we can leave that to one side. Slight adjustment. Just leave that to dry, and then we can come back to it later on once everything else has been attached. Okay, where do you get your scalpels? I find them on eBay. They are Swan Morton. That's Swan with two ends, and they are the size 3 handle. You can see there, size 3 handle, and the blades are 10A blades. You can just about see it on the blade there. They do different ones as well. They do these rounded ones, which are 6 blades, but I tend to use the straight ones. I find them a little bit more useful. These are quite good if you're like trimming down smoothed areas. There we go. Okay, right. Let's just see how we're looking over here now. So I think we can actually start looking at making these adjustments now this glue's dried. We're going to trim this down here a little bit. Now I am cutting into the armor, which might seem a little bit odd, but sometimes you have to make... Oh, you know what, I can probably get away with just... If I bend the... I want to make sure I get this bend right. Yeah, I think I can get away with that. Let's bring in the pin vise. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create a fake knee joint, I suppose. So I'm just drilling into the leg there. And the intention of this here is to give me a knee that I can then bend around. And that'll help me to give me a slightly more realistic knee bend, I suppose. So I'm just going to drill 2 holes, one into each side of the leg, and this will be something I'll be repeating on the hips as well. And then I'm just going to grab a little bit of this wire here. Let me just find the start of it. There we go. A little bit of this wire here. Trim that end off. It's just 1mm wire, steel wire, just quite nice. Flexible, soft wire. Just don't need that much. That'll do. And I'm going to apply a little bit there. A little bit of super glue. I'm going to pop that into the hole that we drilled, like so. Then we're going to trim that down to about there, I think. Really, about there. And then, if we bring in this knee here, I'm not going to glue it just yet, but if I bring it in, you can see we kind of get ourselves a little bit of a knee bend that we can essentially bend it around like so, and it keeps the leg attached for the time being. I've actually just pulled that hip out. So what we can do is we can kind of see where this knee bend wants to be. So at the moment it's pretty straight, so we need to bend it round a little bit. So we've bent it back. Go a little bit more, I think. Oh, I've just completely pulled that out. There we go. Probably go a little bit further as well. Okay. This has gone wrong. There we go. Let's just do it without the hip joint for the time being. Okay, so I think that's right. So let's glue this on now that we have the bend that we want, and I can basically use this as essentially a scaffold when I start to add the putty on to fill that gap in. And it also helps to strengthen the bond because I'm not relying on the putty or just a little bit of plastic glue just in this section here to hold it down. I'm just going to apply a little bit of plastic glue there just to make sure that these stay lined up. There we go. Okay, so we've got the bend achieved. So that's that leg done. We've got the basic pose there, so let's just bring this back onto here. It's not quite as much as I wanted, but it gives us a slight bend. I can probably maybe adjust something on the other leg. Let's see what we've got here. How does this attach? Like so. So I bring the leg out a little bit. I think if we bring it out to about there, I think. That should give us a slightly different pose. So let's again do that thing with the pinning. Trying to keep these holes quite straightforward down the center of the legs, just so they essentially mimic where the bones would be, as best as I can at least. Essentially giving our Primus Reavers a hip replacement operation here. There we go. So, now we've got a length of wire, we're going to attach it to the hip first. A little bit of super glue. Pop that into there like so. Trim this down. A little bit longer this time. Can always remove it if need be. So if I bring in the leg now, we should be able to find that I can add this in and slightly adjust my leg pose ever so slightly. Probably need a little bit longer wire actually. Let's just grab a longer section for this. Place that into the hole again. Try again. Round 2. Okay, that's a little bit too long, but we can trim that down. Sometimes it's always best just to kind of cut a little bit less than you think you need, and then you can always make those adjustments later on. But if you've already made the cuts, then there's not much you can do. Okay, so I think that's going to work okay. What I'm going to do actually before I do that is bring in this torso section, because we might need to make some adjustments. Yeah, I think we're going to need to make some adjustments here just to get that to fit properly. I'm just going to use a scalpel, just start scooping that out, smooth that out afterwards. And because these are fabric, you can kind of get away with the fact that these are kind of depressed slightly against the leg. Okay, I think that'll work for that pose there. We've kind of got a slightly wider angle there of the legs. I'm just going to glue this torso on. There's no point leaving it off for the time being. We might as well attach it now. Some plastic glue this time. Then we can bring in the torso. And whilst we're holding that, we can glue on this leg. Wrong leg. There we go. A little bit too outwards there, I think. Looks a bit weird. Straighten up a little bit. Yep, I think that's just enough. If I angle the leg slightly, oh man, it's really tricky to get this right. Yeah, I think that's a really that's a quite a strong power stance that the guy's got going on there. But I think if we attach this here, it's a little bit more of like a depressed kind of, it's kind of squatting down a little bit more than it would have done otherwise. Yeah, that's what we wanted. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that to dry for a second, just before we start actually adding any putty and filling in those gaps. What I'll do is I'm just going to use a bit of super glue here. Normally I would shave this down and then use plastic glue, but just because I'm a little bit conscious of time, I'm just going to super glue this leg in place. And then we can just leave that there for the time being. Okay. So look at the comments. So what's the gist of this fencing lunge? Yes, that's basically what. So what's the gist of this homebrew? Yeah, I think I mentioned it already. It's basically a Blood Angel successor chapter. These guys are trained and designed to hunt down renegade Space Marines. They are trained to fight against Space Marines, and they use their swords, which is this sword here. And they are expert swordsmen, and they will essentially capture the hearts of any opponents that they defeat. You can see this little component here from the Malasai kit. Your Tic Tac just summarised it for Blue Oyster Cult, so you just timed that perfectly. What else have we got? Praise Bitsbox, our Lord and Saviour. There we go. Praised him. Praise Lord Bitsbox, our Lord and Saviour. Define what glues are you using? I am using plastic glue. I'm using Plastic Magic. That's for all my plastic kits. It's what I use at the moment. Any conversions you see me using plastic glue, this is what I use. There's a link to it in the description below. You can follow. And for super glue, I'm just kind of using some armor paint super glue here. I've used Gorilla Glue, but this is quite nice. I've used this as well. Tactical or intercessors, which do you prefer? Personally, I like intercessors, mainly because I think that tactical, the kit's nice. It has a lot of options in there, but now that we have Primus, I think a lot of the firstborn Space Marines just look quite short, which is unfortunate, really. But yeah, I think they look a lot shorter than they probably were intended to look back when they were designed. But against Primus, they look a lot shorter. So yeah, definitely intercessors, I think. Rules-wise, I'm not sure. Some people say that tactical squads are still better value for money, but we'll see. Benjamin Del Rio, I'm not sure. I would probably check them out. They are UK based, so I'm not sure if they would ship to Chile. But it's worth checking them out. Maybe drop them a message if they don't specifically say. They might be happy to do so. So I think that super glue is dried now. So we're going to use some of this putty now. This has been mixed for about what time? Around half an hour. So it's been mixed for about half an hour. I like to pre-mix my putties just because it gives them a little bit of chance to harden. I'm just going to have a bit of water here. They still stay quite soft though, so still quite usable, but it's not quite as sticky, not quite as tacky. So we need to fill in those gaps now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by using just a small lump of it. Small lump of this just to bulk out the area, and then we can start to add the details on afterwards. Kind of using this essentially as a filler. So we need to get a small, tiny little bit here just to place into that knee socket. Probably had a little bit more in there, but we're going to just add this in first. Okay. Where's my product? Technical term here. Just going to prod that in. I'm using water here just to make sure that these stay. I've got a little bit of paint on there. Just make sure that these all stay on the components as opposed to actually sticking to the tools that I'm using. So I'm just going to fill that in. You can see I've not quite filled it to the edge just yet. I want to add a little bit more into here afterwards. Just going to place that in, make sure it's pushed in, right into all these gaps and fairly consistent and smooth all the way around. Probably need a little bit more for that gap there. So essentially we're just gap filling at the moment. We're going to add a little bit more detail to these in a second. We're basically going to recreate the ridged kind of sections of, I'm not sure what it is. It's basically those little bits. We're going to recreate those sections in a second. We just need to do this first. Pop that in there. We can use the prodder. I think I've got a little bit of Gryph-hound orange on here, which is why everything's kind of giving itself like a reddish orangey tint. It's a little bit wet, let's get a bit of towel on there. So I think the thing is about the older Space Marine kits is, I mean the Devastator's kit is fantastic. I've said it on a stream before. The amount of conversion potential that you have in some of the older kits is amazing, and it'd be really kind of terrible to see that conversion potential go. All those components that you can use, and most of the components are still compatible. I mean, arms tend to be a little bit shorter on the old Firstborn Space Marines, but heads are fine, shoulder pads are fine, equipment is usually fine. It's literally the legs, the bodies, and the arms are the main areas. And I feel like if we ever got rid of them completely, we'd be losing out on so many different opportunities. I've used many components from. I mean, I'm using it in this kit here. You can see here we've got a Death Company head, we've got a Death Company shoulder pad. Those guys are the older scale non-Primaris Marines. And if we didn't have them, I wouldn't have had those components. So, whilst I'm all for kind of Primaris taking over, I don't want to see the older kits go. At least until we have some decent replacements for them, which will probably be a while. Okay, so we filled that one in. We need to do the same with this hip joint here. What kit would you like to see a Primaris equivalent of? So it's a bit of a tricky one really, because I quite like Devastators. I quite like how they have the heavy weaponry. That would be quite cool, but I suppose you could argue that things like Eradicators are essentially new Devastators. Hellblasters are essentially new Devastators. And I think we haven't got a Primaris Terminator yet. The Gravis Armor Terminators aren't the same. They're just tougher versions of regular Space Marines. They just have a higher toughness. That's about it, really. There's no real kind of specific Terminator equivalent of them. Even the new Blade Guard veterans, I've said in the live stream that I did when I flicked through the rules for those guys, even though they have the invulnerable save, they have the 2+ armor save, they have the storm shields, they're still not quite Terminators. They're still not the same as Terminators. They can't deep strike, they can't do all these things that classic Terminators can do. And I feel like if we're going to see a transition of all these characters moving from original Space Marine across the Primaris Rubicon Primaris, whatever you want to call it, then we're going to need to see some sort of replacement for these units as well, because at the moment we don't really have them. But some jump pack assault intercessors would be pretty cool. So I don't think aggressors are quite Terminators. I think they have a different battlefield role. And they also have a different. Their armor, the niche that they fill in is different. They're more fire support than kind of all-round elite units that can do well in close combat, well, do deep striking, and I don't know. The aggressors aren't quite there for me yet. So we've got quite a big gap here at the back, so we're going to need to fill that in. So I'm just going to use this piece here that I've already pulled off. Might be a bit too much, let's just cut that down. Okay, let's go for that. Push this in, fill out that gap. So like I said, the first task is just to smooth everything out, just to get everything smoothed out so you can't see the weird little metal hip replacements that we've added in. We just want something which is fairly straightforward. Okay. Trim that down a little bit, that's a little bit too much there. Okay, just going to leave that a little bit of time just to settle for the time being, and I think we can check this out now. Yeah, that's nice and firm now. We can go ahead and glue that to the torso. I'm not going to add it just yet because I want to make sure that I'm not getting in the way, but potentially this is the kind of pose that we're going to go for now. So I'm going to have him leaning ever so slightly forward. I'm probably going to file down the feet a little bit and then have him essentially across his chest. The gun that I'm using is actually this one here. Now I'm not actually going to use the grapple. Did I have it off camera then? I think I did. Let's just have him. There we go. We're going to have a guy like that. Slightly leaning forward. And then we're going to use this arm here. Now the reason I wanted to use this arm was mainly because of the pose, because I can kind of slightly bend it in a little bit and it kind of matches the sword being across the chest. I actually really like these as just kind of heavy duty bolt pistols. I'm going to cut this off obviously, so we're kind of looking at the pistol like that, but I thought it looks quite nice. Quite a nice little bolt pistol there. You basically cut it off there, drill that out, and you've got quite a nice bolt pistol. So let's do that actually. Let's just work on that for the time being. Just whilst we wait everything else. So let's just trim that down. And then we can drill a hole into the center. Essentially, we've turned a grapnel gun or grapnel launcher, whatever they're called, into a heavy-duty bolt pistol. There we go. Nice and simple. Sometimes conversions don't have to be elaborate and complex. They can just be straightforward. Pete, do you know any third parties other than Cromlech that make Primus bits? Cromlech is amazing, especially the rose, but they're also pretty pricey when it comes to shipping. So, Primus. Yeah, if you're looking for some good... Let's see if I've got anything in here. Do I have anything to hand? I did have a bag full of stuff at one point, and I don't think I do. Yeah, okay. So, Anvil Industry is pretty... has quite a big range of stuff for their Primus range. I think they're called Exolords. But if I show you these here, we have these kind of like roller chunky looking legs and torsos, and they have things like heads as well. See a bunch of heads, got some female heads as well if you want some of those. And these are basically kind of Primus scale. They're probably a little bit bigger than Primus, I'd say. They're kind of very much chunky. But yeah, they fit quite nicely in terms of the height. It's a little bit chunkier, but yeah. Anvil Industries, so those are Anvil Ranger torsos. That's what they're called. They have arms as well. Let me see if I've got any of those. Yep, they have arms. And they have weapons for those as well. I'm not sure if I've got any of those here, but... backpacks, more legs, so yeah. Check those guys out. They've got some... they're not quite as themed around Warhammer, but they have some pretty cool Primus items. Okay, so let's start adding a little bit of details. The rest of these kind of extra bits on here are fairly straightforward to add on, so I'm not worried too much about them taking too long. So let's just add a little bit of water to this surface here, and we're basically going to roll out some thin sausages, some thin strands of putty here. Okay, so we want to essentially recreate that ridged effect that we have on the back sides of the knees. So I want to get nice and thin. Okay, I think that's thin enough. And we're going to then just trim it down. I'm just going to wet this blade first. Trim these down a little bit. Just trim these ends off first because how they taper off, I don't want those necessarily. I'm going to trim about that much to begin with. I'm going to use a brush here. Where have my brush gone? This brush is not flexible enough. No, I think these are too big. Sometimes you can use these quite easily with a brush, and other times they're a little bit too heavy. Use your finger. Right, so I'm going to pop this in there very carefully. I'm going to use a brush just to smooth it out, just to get it into place. You know, now I'm doing this, I'm kind of tempted just to add in these details with a knife afterwards rather than doing it this way. This might be a little bit too fiddly. We'll see how we go. Don't want these standing out too much. I want them to be slightly depressed against the line there. So let's just add another one in and we can start adjusting things as and when we need them. Just see if we can get these a little bit thinner actually. There we go. That's a bit better. Tell me about your chapter. I'm late. A few people have popped in late, so yeah, I'm happy to tell you. So basically these guys are Primarists. They are tasked with hunting down other Space Marines that have turned Renegade or turned to Chaos, and they are basically expert swordsmen. They also have a trait which means that they tend to capture and take the hearts of any Renegade Space Marines that they've defeated, and they'll display them about their person. So that's where the Vorpal kind of comes from. They're Master Swordsmen, and the hearts is because they take the hearts of their enemies. So I'm just stretching these out a little bit at the sides, and that'll help to just get those in the gaps a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to trim those. Use my knife here. I can use a knife just to press that down a little bit more, just to get that definition back. Okay. Do the same on the other side. Okay, so we kind of have a little bit more of a Space Marine looking joint in the leg there. We don't have this kind of big, it's a little bit messy here, but we can touch that up in a second. There we go. So if needs be, I can probably trim this down a little bit once everything's dried. I can always add a little bit more if I need to as well. So I think that's okay for the first thing. You can see there we've got the little ridged effect there. Okay, so same for the other side. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky, I think. I'm going to just try and smooth this down a little bit more with a brush. dry that off, make sure the actual next layer attaches properly. And I'm going to use a little bit more of this. Starting to remove some of the black from my cutting mat here. Place that in the gap like so, and then we're going to carefully press that down. Oh man. Fortunately, it's not sticking to the putty underneath at the moment. I think it's because I've accidentally rolled this into some paint, so it's lost all its stickiness, which is unfortunate. Let's see if we can remove that. There we go. Okay. I'm going to press this in, I think, just because we're going to need to make some cuts after that, I think. I do apologise for this, but I'm kind of concentrating on getting these right, so being a little bit quiet, but and we need the same on the back here. Now I'm tempted just to scour these in. I'm tempted just to try that, see how that works. I'm going to get a little bit more putty here. A little bit of small amount, and I'm just going to pop that into there, and I'm actually going to try and sculpt the ridges directly into this, see if it comes out a little bit better than trying to roll out the sausages, which doesn't seem to want to work on this particular leg at the front. Okay, so I'm going to press it down first, get it all smoothed out, and I can start to sculpt out these little lines again. It looks a little bit easier to do it this way. I've got my knife for this actually because these are slightly finer, so we want to make the cuts match them as well. Now these kind of things around where these joins are, it's not too bad, because if you do make a mistake, you can basically just cover it up with some pouches or grenades, things like that. But I think that'll do for the time being. I probably would have liked to have sorted this out a little bit more, but I'm just concerned that I'm going to be overrunning if I spend too much time on this section here, so hopefully that'll stick for the time being. Okay, so the rest of the model, what do we need? I do actually just remember that I forgot to clip off the backpack here, so we'll have to adjust with that one. So we can start gluing on the arms that we've already prepped now. Can glue on the sword here. We can pop that just across the chest, like so. Nice and easy, nice and straightforward. Kind of fits in with the stance that we've got as well. And then we can start attaching the other arm. Just go there. And we can slightly modify the pose of the arm. So rather than having it pointing upwards, it's kind of pointing downwards instead. Make sure I can get this to fit properly. Okay. I think that's in place there. Just a little bit concerned about the blade there. Okay, there we go. That's better. I was kind of worried he was just going to kind of clip the gun as he's swinging around his blade then. The head that I've chosen to use is a Death Company head. Blood Angels Death Company. I think it kind of fits the theme. These guys are successors, so it makes sense that these guys are a little bit like Flesh Tearers in the sense that they're very much like their parent chapter. I quite like the guy who's shouting as well. Also avoid using the typical Reaver helmet. Just pop that down like so. Okay, so shoulder pad. Again, this is another item that's been taken from the Death Company. That can just be popped on the side. Again, these shoulder pads, all from all your other kits, Space Marine kits, will work fine on your Primus kits as well. So, oh man, really, really opens up the conversion potential when you start using the shoulder pads from other kits. So I did forget to actually cut off the backpack from the spruce. I'm going to quickly do that in the last 5 minutes. And I've got the hearts here. So I've got those hearts from Malasai kit. I think I'm going to have pierce side outwards. I'll probably just hang them from the belt somewhere, just maybe around here. And that can kind of help to cover up some of my terrible sculpting work. I'm going to glue today. Nothing wants to work today. There we go. So we have the hearts. And I did, let's see if I can quickly grab a backpack out. Do I have any on hand? Yeah, I've got them. Completely forgot to cut one off earlier. Patrick Lawson. No one else has said. Okay, so these guys are basically Blood Angel successors. They are geared up with swords and they are trained to be Master Swordsmen, and their sole purpose is to go out and hunt down Chaos Space Marines, Renegade Space Marines, and defeat them. The hearts that you saw me adding on there was basically a trophy that they take from any fallen Space Marines that they encounter. So just adding on the backpack here, quickly trimming off the mold lines here. Normally I'm so organised. Normally all these are done ahead of time. All the components are cleaned and prepped. I completely forgot about this backpack. I don't know why. Okay. So not as clean as I would like it, but it'll do. I can always take it off later and clean up again. But we've got to add it on because it just finishes off the model. So how do we want this to stand? We need a base for it. Do I have one to hand? I forgot to grab one again. I'm just going to just pop this against here so you guys can see it. There we go. Pete, what is the best Guard regiment in your opinion? Personally, I really like the Death Corps of Krieg. I really like their aesthetic. I think that the miniatures that they have are really cool. They still fit in the Imperial Guard theme, but they are very much kind of their own thing as well. They're very iconic and very visually nice. In fact, actually, I've been working on a plastic conversion for them. This is kind of a prototype that I've got, so I'm kind of be interested to see what you guys think about it. So this is a little kind of Death Corps of Krieg third-party kit bash that I've got here. So it's all plastic, you can see in its grey form, and basically what I've used, this is partly the Grognard's kit, which is from Wargames Atlantic, and I've also used their new German Infantry World War I kit as well. And I've also taken a few parts from the Imperial Guards, where you can see there. Have I got this focus right? There we go. I've used the kind of, this is just basically a normal kind of rifle, and I've taken the tip from a Lasgun and the little Lasgun ammo as well. And I've just added some patch on the back there. So I think it comes out quite nicely. It kind of looks like Death Corps Krieg. It's incredibly cheap because a whole box of 30 of them is like incredibly cheap. So You just need to mix and match a few components from different sets, but it still makes them cheaper than resin. But I'm going to paint this guy up, and I'll be doing a tutorial for him very soon. Right, so where were we? Base. Now, one of the things that I mentioned is I wanted to slightly adjust the pose here, and I think to get the best kind of use out of that pose, I'm going to need to maybe build the base up a little bit, or at least have him standing forward a little bit more. So I think I'm going to have him standing forward. So I'm going to use a file. Do I have like a flat one here? I'm just going to file across the surface here just to make these feet flatten out a bit more. If you want to choose an army you haven't collected before, what army would you collect? I mean, to be honest, actually, I mean, going back, it might seem like a bit of a cop-out, but I would really like to have a full army of Death Corps of Krieg. I really like the artillery pieces and some of the vehicles as well. I think they're really interesting. I like how they're very much kind of based on historical World War One. Very much a, I think it's called, is it called Diesel Punk, something like that? That whole style really interests me. So I think, yeah, definitely would love to do those guys. So now I've filed those down a little bit, we can glue these on. So I haven't made it quite super flat, but by kind of filing down the feet a little bit, I should have been able to make the angle slightly more forward facing than they would have been otherwise. So just pop that down. Okay. So there we go. I think that's done. Probably a few extra little bits I could add, like pouches and things like that, but those are fairly generic. There's nothing special about pouches. I would have just taken them from the Reaver kit anyway. But yeah, this is basically the homebrew little challenge that I set myself by randomly generating the name, and this is what I came up with. So yeah, Vorpal Hearts. He has a blade, a Vorpal blade, and he has some hearts. So what more can you ask for? As always, thank you for joining me on this stream. I apologise if I haven't been able to answer as many questions. Sometimes it's very difficult to concentrate on these conversions and do these little fiddly bits and still talk and still answer your questions, things like that. So I do apologise if I have little quiet periods in there. As always, if you have any ideas for what I can do in future streams, please do let me know. These streams are basically a way of me getting through a backlog, because at the moment I can do maybe one full conversion guide a week, and what I would like to do is more of those, but I don't have the time to do full conversion guides. So these basically allow me to spend an hour talking to you guys and doing a conversion. So if you have any suggestions for conversions, then let me know, and if I don't get a chance to do them in a full video, I can do them in a stream like this as well. So yeah, thank you very much for joining this stream. All of the usual statements at the end of these streams will soon be following. Check out my Discord server. There is a link in the description below. Lots of fantastic people on there. If you have any interest in wargaming, there is a group of people on there which you'll be interested in, be it painting, conversions, or just off-topic conversations about Warhammer in general. There's lots of people on there, so check that out. If you already support me on Patreon, or you're a channel member, or you click on my affiliates links, a huge thank you. Everything you do allows me to go out and purchase these kits and purchase these materials and things like that allow me to make these videos, so a huge thank you for that. I'm going to say praise Bitsbox, the Lord and Saviour. Thank you, Adam. Don't want to forget those. But yeah, I think that's the end of this stream. So huge thank you for everyone who has joined me, and we will be, I don't think I'll be doing one on Wednesday. We'll be doing I'm going to try and get a video, an extra video out this week, a painting tutorial for some Japanese infantry for bolt action. So if you're a fan of bolt action, then some nice content coming in for you this week. And next Friday's video is, I'm currently working on it here. It's a Space Wolf Blade God conversion. You can see I've gone for traditional Heresy era colour grey armour there as well. So that's what we're looking forward to this week. And until the next live stream, which will probably be Sunday, thank you for joining me this time. And I do hope that you see you in the next one.